Khamsin, the hot dry wind that blows in from the desert, derived from the Arabic word for 50, because according to Arab tradition it is supposed to blow for 50 days during the course of the year. The lean 19-year-old from West London was sweltering, unaccustomed to these desert conditions. At least the heat was dry, he thought. That made it just about bearable. All he had to do was remember to drink plenty of water. Having holidayed once in Sharm el-Sheikh, he was grateful that it wasn't humid heat here, like it was on the coast. But even so, it was weather for relaxing by a hotel swimming pool, not for working on an archaeological dig. Now, in the heat of a morning in late March, over a dozen fit young students were working in their designated areas under the watchful eyes of Egyptian soldiers. These enthusiastic volunteers came from all over the world: Egypt, Europe, South America, even Australia and New Zealand. Each volunteer was assigned an area of 1 meter square. It was painstaking work. Armed with a metal trowel, plastic scoop, and small-headed brush for cleaning larger finds, the youth dug out to a depth of 6 inches below the previous level, put the contents into a bucket, and took it over to the volunteers who operated the sieve screens. The pair were known as JJ because of their initials, Joel and Jane. Though similar in age, he at the end of his teens, she barely out of hers, they were an unlikely team. The wiry ginger-haired nerd and the bottle blonde with a cheerleader body. But they had been thrown together by chance, and now the two of them were inextricably linked by this coincidence of nomenclature. Joel had been assigned to this relatively simple job because of his lack of experience, but it was a role that carried its fair share of responsibility. And as the volunteer from London turned up at his shoulder with a bucket full of sand and pebbles, Joel sighed. He was not expecting anything to break the monotony of the day. From a corner of the dig site, the work was being overseen by a blonde woman with a commanding presence and an almost Nordic appearance. She preferred to watch from a distance because whenever she wandered around the site, people stopped their work to look at her, especially the men. It was an understandable reaction. She was not a woman whom it was easy to ignore. Her back was both broad and straight, and her well-toned thighs and arms subtly muscular, but her torso was by no means devoid of fat. In a woman of average height, this combination of muscle and fat would have made her look rather squat, but at 5'11" she towered over most other women, and was perfectly proportioned, especially in the eyes of men. She was Gabrielle Gusak, a young Viennese archaeologist, and she was looking at the work with a mixture of exhaustion and pride. It had taken a lot of determination and a healthy dose of diplomacy to get this dig approved. The site was in a restricted military area at the foot of Mount Hashem el-Tarif, closely guarded by the Egyptian army due to its proximity to the Israeli border, and for this reason had never been subjected to a proper archaeological excavation, despite hints and signs that it might be of historical significance. After some delicate lobbying, the authorities gave the dig the green light, albeit with some stringent conditions attached. No mobile phones or cameras were to be brought to the site, and only an official cameraman working for the Supreme Council of Antiquities would be allowed to take pictures. Thus the Egyptian authorities could control the flow of information that came out of the dig. It was the SCA and its head, Akil Mansour, that had proved to be the linchpin of this whole project. Mansour was not only an enthusiastic supporter of the project, but also Gabrielle's mentor. She had done her PhD under him at the University of Cairo, and their friendship had proved enduring, if somewhat volatile. He was also a friend of her uncle, the much-respected biblical historian Harrison Carmichael. Perhaps most important of all, he was the Vice Minister of Culture. But not even he could override security considerations or the Egyptian military, and he had been forced to engage in a certain amount of horse trading, as he gingerly tiptoed around the objections and won over the key decision-makers in the political and military hierarchy. And now, with the job of brokering the deal accomplished, he stayed away from the site and let the enthusiastic kids rise to the challenge of painting the fence, with his attractive protégé playing the role of Tom Sawyer. Of course, if they found anything exciting, he would lose no time in going out there to make the official announcement before the cameras. The volunteer who had just emptied his bucket into the sieve screen didn't wait to see the results. He simply returned to his digging. Joel shook the screen now to begin the separation process, and as the sand fell away, a large number of Normally, the residue proved to be nothing but desert pebbles, but this time something caught his eye. Mindful of Gabrielle's instruction to observe the residue before bagging it up, he looked more closely, blinked, and then looked again. It wasn't that the stones were of any radically different material. Quite the contrary, they were typical of the local stone. Nor were they any larger than usual, and they certainly didn't have the glint of noble metals or the crystalline glow of precious stones. No, it was just that these fragments of stone seemed to have some markings on them. Joel picked one up and held it closer to get a better look. Turning it this way and that, he noticed that on one side it had engraved shapes. The shapes were too unfamiliar to be any alphabet that he knew, but they did look like writing, not merely random markings. He picked up another and looked at it, then another, and then yet another. He noticed some repetition of symbols, which confirmed his suspicion that there was nothing random about these engravings. They had been made purposively by a human hand, and that made this a find. He could just bag it up and mark it, leaving others to figure out its significance. But something about the discovery appealed to his ego. He wanted some small share of the kudos, even if someone else had dug it up and someone more knowledgeable than himself would interpret it. In any case, if it was something important, they would surely want to know about it now. Joel realized that he had been daydreaming, and Jane said that something was up. "What?" she asked in that ever-cheerful way of hers. He held out one of the stone fragments and let her look at it, making sure that she didn't actually get her hands on it. "Oh my God!" she blurted out. Fearing that others would hear and start gathering round before he had a chance to claim his share of the glory, he threw the fragments into a bag and raced over to Professor Gusak, suppressing the urge to cry out aloud like Archimedes on his homeward sprint from the public bathhouse. While Joel was racing off to claim his share of the glory, Jane felt her breath constricting. Unlike Joel, stood the full significance of what she had just seen, and she had to do something about it. Mumbling some excuse about stomach bug, she raced off to the latrines, which were little more than holes in the ground, with individual booths around them. She closed and bolted her and whipped out her mobile phone, which she was supposed to have handed over at the entrance to the camp. Safely ensconced in the latrine, she frantically keyed in a message and then hit the send button. A minute later, her message appeared on another phone 6,000 miles away. It said, "They've found the stones."